Hi, this is Trenton Bennett. I'm the audiobook narrator for the books Slingshot and the Starchild Compact by science fiction author Robert G. Williscroft, and I've got him here with me today to talk a little bit about the Starchild Compact. So, Robert, thanks very much for joining me.
Well, thank you for having me.
You bet. Let me ask you, what was the first seed of an idea that inspired you to write the Starchild series?
I was following the Cassini-Huygens spacecraft. It's been out there for quite a while. In fact, it just recently was crashed into Saturn as it had reached the end of its life, and it gave us some interesting data from that crashing into the atmosphere of Saturn. But I have been following it on and off for years. And at one point, the spacecraft did a flyby of Saturn's moon Iapetus. We have known, the human community, the science-interested community, have known for a long time that Iapetus has a couple of interesting features. One of them is a mountain range around the equator that is about 20 kilometers high and 20 kilometers wide. The mountains follow one another like soldiers in a column. They're not side by side. This is an unusual feature, and it's really kind of difficult to come up with an explanation that makes sense. Furthermore, there is a pattern that you can see if you look at Iapetus from a distance, as we have had to do, that shows what look like hexagonal sections, almost as if it had been put together by large hexagonal pieces in some artificial way. It could be an artifact of the photographs, but it sure looks like it's there. And then Iapetus has a density that would be just fine if it were a snowball, except Iapetus is a solid rocky moon, and the density makes no sense unless it's hollow. So the Cassini-Huygens spacecraft did a low flyby so that it was literally not very many kilometers above the mountaintops of the equatorial mountain range. And this is a video, and I watched that with fascination and looked at them, and in my mind's eye, I could see all of these mountains connected into a wall. I could just sort of see it happening. My mind would fill in the distances between the mountains. I got to thinking about it. I thought, wouldn't it be fascinating if Iapetus were a derelict starship?
Oh, wow.
And from that germ of an idea, the Starchild was born.
That's pretty amazing if you think about how humanity began dreaming about the man in the moon and then fascinated about the face on Mars. And now we have something that seems far more interesting. I mean, the geometry itself, and as you say, the science behind the way the planet's behavior appears to be. We've got a lot more clues that line up now than we ever had before.
The folks at NASA would poo-poo what I just said, of course. And in a sense, so do I. But it certainly makes it's easy to suspend your disbelief when you're confronted with those kinds of facts.
It's a little bit more of a lucid dream, I would say, than much science fiction can be. So you've had some interesting experiences in your very real and very adventurous life. Are there any characters in the Starchild Compact who are actually based on your own real-life interactions with people from around the world?
Actually, there are. Dmitry Gagarin, the Russian colonel from the Russian Federation military who plays a prominent role in the novel, in some aspects is modeled after a Russian scientist that I spent lots of time with at the South Pole. There are some major differences between them. Dmitry is a really good guy. The scientist I spent time with at the South Pole cheated at poker. So there were some major differences between them. But personality-wise, I had something to go on, and I built him from there. The John Stock, the captain, is modeled after a couple of commanding officers I had in the Navy who had his sort of character and his sort of approach to problems and leadership. A couple of the women who are part of the crew, again, are modeled after people that I have known at one time or another in my long career. But the major modeling job is Ginger Steele, the astrogator, who in the novel is tall, black, lanky, with kinky hair. And if you take the physical characteristics of hair and skin away from her and make her blonde and fair-skinned, she is the girl I married.
Oh, wow. That's great. So that's really fascinating. And of course, you've got a little bit of real life going on there. And your Starchild series itself borrows from real-world current events. You extrapolate about a possible future as you go forward through the series. Has your original vision for these books changed along the way? Or as you look around you in the real world, do you feel like things are still lining up pretty much the way you'd expected them to when you started out?
I think not only are they lining up the way I anticipated they might, they're actually going down that path rather rapidly. I have been writing about extreme Islam since the mid-1980s. I have been raising the warning signals and telling anyone who would listen to me that ahead of us lies a major problem that we're going to have to deal with, and there's no escaping it. And I bring that problem into sharp focus in the Starchild Compact, which is radical Islam and its mandate to take over the world by whatever means it can.
So we see a lot of that coming. I guess in the Iapetus Federation, we're going to find out what happens when it seemed to come to a head in the Starchild Compact, but I'm assuming that there's still a lot more to go.
Well, it turned out that I really liked my character, Saeed Ismail, and I had several opportunities to kill him off. And in fact, my character, Dmitri, in the Iapetus Federation, at one point bemoans the fact that they hadn't spaced him back when they first found him. But yeah, he takes on a major role and becomes a major player, not just in the novel, but on the planet Earth itself.
Wow. Well, let's take a moment and talk a little about the tech side of things as well. Because in the Starchild Compact, you hint at some technological or human progress events that happened between the creation of the launch loop that we see in Slingshot and the ability to cross the solar system to Iapetus using a VASIMR engine. Do you have any plans to tell us more about those in-between things?
Yeah, that's very ripe for some short stories. I think back, one of my heroes, one of my mentors was Robert Heinlein, and he wrote several short stories about the development of the atomic rocket engine and the perils that his engineers had to deal with when they were developing, working with, and using atomic rocket engines. Well, things didn't go that way, but the VASIMR engine is sort of the modern real-world equivalent, which has already been built by NASA and is being further developed to the point where in the not-too-distant future, it will be able to function the way the VASIMR engine functions in Starchild. But I use a gaseous core or a variable gaseous core reactor to power it. These have been constructed on a small scale, and it looks like they're going to reach a point where they can play virtually the identical role that they do in my novel, unless somebody comes up with something even better, and that's always possible.
That's amazing. Yeah, I have to admit that during the Starchild Compact, I did a little research myself and was very pleasantly surprised to find out about the Astra Rocket Company. They just happen to be working on a VASIMR engine, and I've seen them posting a little bit here and there as they've been testing the idea. So it does sound like we'll get there and then we'll go a little bit beyond.
One of the things that may not be apparent to the typical reader, simply because not everybody has my background, is that I have the Mirrors complex, which leads the moon at the L4 position, having been constructed primarily by a business interests out of the Russian Federation. And it goes back to a time prior to the present time when the two Mirrors deep submersibles were developed by, at first, the Soviet government, and then a private institute that is headed by a now aging scientist who took one of the Mirrors deep submersibles down to the ocean bottom at the geographic North Pole.
Oh, wow. That's just amazing.
And I carry forward from that. And so the Mirrors Corporation develops out of that, and I sort of drop hints of how it gets developed and how it got there within the Starchild compact, so that people have some sense that, hey, these are real things and real people and real ideas and real companies, real histories.
I will tell you, I'm not a very worldly person, I would suppose, and it was fascinating as a narrator to periodically run across these things and find out more and say, there's a lot more realism behind all of this. I didn't realize how much of your hard SF was actually driven by a very real speculation. So that's a great element of these books.
When we jump into the Iapetus Federation, I go into the backgrounds of a couple of the people who appear briefly in the Starchild Compact, Russian oligarchs who have moved their operations out of Russia to London and then to the L4 complex and use their vast resources to develop part of the moon and to develop the complex at L4, which becomes one of the major elements in the Iapetus Federation.
Oh, great. So, speaking of that, in the Starchild Compact, what was your favorite scene to write? Do you have a favorite?
Well, there are a couple. One of them is what happens when the Cassini-2 is on tether in rotational mode to create gravity, and a small asteroid strikes the tether. And what happens, and how they solve that problem. That's one of my favorite scenes. Another one is a fairly short scene dealing with Michel, who is the French biologist, who is probably the most sexually oriented person in the spacecraft, and she is in her late 30s and beginning to worry about her femininity, and we get into her head as she enjoys the effects that weightlessness have on certain parts of her anatomy. And another scene I thoroughly enjoyed writing was when the group is inside Iapetus and discover that the insects aren't really insects.
That's going to be really interesting. And of course, I know you're being very careful not to drop spoilers on us, but... So you're talking about a very interesting reveal in the book that has to do with, well, it's almost like a technological giveaway that tells them that they're somewhere where the technology is way ahead of theirs. Let's come back down to Earth for a moment. Let me ask you, if you could name one thing that you think would dramatically accelerate our space program today, what would that be? Would it be a VASIMR engine or a launch loop? What's the game changer?
The launch loop is the game changer. The launch loop isn't going to happen until the amount of mass that we're moving into space reaches a point where it's more economically feasible to put money into constructing and operating a space launch loop than it is to building rockets and spending money on rocket fuel. And when we reach that point, the space launch loop will become the Colt of space travel, the equalizer.
So it's going to be money and mass.
Right. Keith Lofstrom, in his foreword to Slingshot, discusses that in some detail.
That was a very interesting foreword, given that was the one person who kind of came up with the idea. I know you've mentioned before that his paper on that was kind of what inspired you for the concept of Slingshot.
Yeah, that's right.
So let me go ahead and drop a little bit of a spoiler alert here. We'll maybe we want to skip ahead a few minutes if you don't want to know, but I'm going to go ahead and ask this question. Was it random chance, or was there anything in particular that inspired you to make the founders genetically linked to the Hebrews?
Well, that comes back to some reading I had been doing about the blood RH factors and the RH negative and RH positive. I, for example, have O negative blood, which means that I do not have an RH factor. And I found out that RH stands for the rhesus monkey, and the rhesus monkey has one of these factors in its blood. And I looked at the human population and discovered that the Semites as a group, that is, the Hebrews, the Palestinians, not the Persians, but most of the others in that area have a larger percentage of Rh negative than the rest of the population. And this is curious. It could be nothing more than that Jews tend to stay within their populations when breeding, when having children, that Arabs tend to do the same thing. It could be something as simple as that. Or there could be other reasons that are mysterious, or there could be no reason at all. But I decided that when I set up the idea that the human race originated on the planet Arcturus, and that the population of Arcturus came to our solar system on what we now know as Iapetus, and when they founded a civilization in ancient times on the planet Earth, and then something happened genetically that caused them almost to die out, except those who had what we now call an Rh positive factor, and they were able to survive. But there were those who had gone back to Arcturus to see how things turned out after their son Novid, and they came back and then jumped in and out of the human race over 150,000 years. They didn't have any Rh factor in their blood, and they became the ancestors of the Semites. And so the Semites as a group, the Hebrews, the Arabs, the Palestinians, all of those people from that part of the planet ultimately could trace their way back through a straight line to the founders.
That's amazing. I think that's one of the things that makes hard science fiction so enjoyable to read, is if you actually have an opportunity like this one to hear an author talk about the process, there's always a lot of thought that goes behind it. We don't get that little gem from reading the book, but I really appreciate you sharing that with us. That's pretty cool.
When you look at genetics and when you look at the real world, this may be nothing more than silly speculation. But then again, there are enough pointers, there are enough indicators that one can ask, which is what a hard science fiction author does, why not? And then justify it within the framework of your story.
So, what are people saying about the Starchild compact to you? Are there any particular fan memories that stand out?
I've been compared to A Rendezvous with Rama, Childhood's End, both Arthur C. Clarke's. I've been compared to Fountains of Paradise, again, Arthur C. Clarke.
I can see that.
And there have been some comparisons to other authors, but they've been more peripheral. The ones that stand out are the ones to Arthur C. Clarke, and I take that as a huge compliment.
Oh, certainly. I mean, his works were fantastic. I will say that Slingshot has kind of that massive science scale that you get in Larry Niven's Ringworld, and you take some of that hard fiction approach, but you seem to do the characters a lot deeper than your typical Niven work.
Yeah, I enjoy writing about people and getting into their thought process, and sometimes shocking the reader.
So what's next for us? Is the Iapetus Federation immediately following the Starchild Compact, or is it set even farther ahead in time?
The Iapetus Federation picks up exactly where the Starchild Compact leaves off. It's a continuation of the story. Some of the characters overlap. Some of the characters come in and out of the story because they get on the starship that is called the Starchild, and they make a trip at near light speed out and back over a 10-year subjective time on Earth, and then they make a second trip that is about 200 years for the people back.
So we'll be seeing some familiar faces from the Starchild Compact returning in the Iapetus Federation?
That is correct.
Good deal.
The American president, Mark Voles, becomes the director of the Starchild Institute, for example, and Rod, the mission controller, at one point becomes the president of the Iapetus Federation. Michelle becomes the First Lady of France.
Oh, neat.
And
that sounds like that's going to be fun.
Others play roles that are not as much in the limelight, not as they were in the Starchild Compact. And a major player in the Iapetus Federation is a distant relative of Sam Houston, who is named Sam Houston and becomes the governor of Texas and ultimately the president of the Lone Star Conservancy.
Interesting.
Which is the only remaining part of the United States that has any viability.
Well, we're getting a little bit of a peek of what lies ahead in the series, but what lies ahead for you? What books do you have waiting for us down the road?
I have been outlining a book that precedes the Starchild Compact, but follows Slingshot, which tells the story of John Stock as the second in command on the first mission to Mars.
Huh.
And what happens, the disaster that takes place, the skipper is killed and he manages to bring the crew back alive, and that's the story in a nutshell.
We get a little bit of a mention to that in the beginning of the Starchild Compact, so it's probably not much of a spoiler for me to say this, but that is one of the things that sounds like it's a character-defining moment for him, and the people around him tend to feel that that was really his moment to shine. So I guess that's going to be a really interesting story to read.
I hope it will be. I don't have it sufficiently fully developed in my own mind yet to be able to go beyond what I just told you.
Well, we're certainly looking forward to it, that's for sure. So for those of you who aren't familiar, the whole story, just to recap, is Slingshot, where we have the construction of an orbital launch loop to help get humanity out into space a little bit more easily. Then we have the Starchild Compact, where we travel our own solar system and we get to find out some very interesting discoveries that bring humanity's technological advancement further forward and make space travel a little bit more convenient, or I should say a lot. And the Iapetus Federation coming up. When are we going to see that? When's that coming out?
I'm shooting to have it out by Christmas, but I can't promise.
Good deal. Well, we'll keep our fingers crossed then. Robert, thanks a lot for your time. I really appreciate you doing this for us.
Absolutely. It's been my pleasure.
Thanks again.